So welcome in. Glad to have everybody with us today. Before I introduce my teammates who are on the call here with me, I just wanted to let everybody know in terms of logistics, when you join the call, you're muted, but that doesn't mean that we don't want to have some interaction with you and hear from you. So you can type some stuff in the chat if you have questions as we go. And actually, I have a question for everyone first as we lead off here. I want to see where folks are calling in from. So if you would just open up the chat window and type in the city that you're dialing in from, so we can get a feel for where folks are, and also so you can get a feel for where the chat feature is in case you have questions. So just type that in. Okay, good. We've got someone from Brussels, Toronto, the UK, some folks from the States here. Oh, the Philippines. Wow, very good. Another from Toronto. Okay, good. So we kind of got folks from all over to go with our, Hungary, Germany, to go with our Austin team here. So as I mentioned, I'm Scott Fincher, but we have two other folks on the call today, and I'll just let them introduce themselves right quick. Satori, you want to say hi?
Hi, my name is Satoru Hayasaka. I'm one of the data scientists for the evangelism team at KNIME. So I work along with Scott and Corey. And I'm going to be doing session 2 during the breakout session today.
Okay, great. And Corey?
Yep. And I'm Corey. I'll be taking group 3, the deployment group. So if you're in that one, I'll be talking to you guys a bit later.
Cool. Thanks, guys. So the way this will work is we're going to kind of start off with an intro to KNIME session because not everybody that's on the call necessarily knows what KNIME is or has downloaded it or even really seen it before. So I'll kind of start out with a little bit of a walkthrough of the software itself. Then we're going to move on into some slides, which I'm showing here, where we're going to talk about the data science cycle. And then for the remainder of our time, we'll actually spin that together in our breakout group. So when you signed up for this Learnathon, you chose one of the 3 groups, either mine, which is ETL and data blending, Satoru's, which is model development, or Corey's, which is deployment. And we'll split out into those sessions. They'll probably spend about an hour in the breakout room together working on an exercise that we're going to provide for you to build out a KNIME workflow and put some of these things that we've talked about into practice. So that's how things are going to go. We'll spend somewhere between an hour and a half and 2 hours together today. Also, all of this is being recorded. So if you join, group 2, for example, but you were really interested to see deployment as well, then you'll have the ability to go back and watch the video and work through the exercises on your own there as well. Because when we give you the exercises, we give you all 3 so that you can, do it however you choose to do it. Okay, hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Let me go ahead, since I've introduced our team, let me introduce our software itself. So I'm going to jump over to KNIME for a second. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to download KNIME already and install it on your machine because we're going to be using it together today. If you haven't had a chance to do that, I would encourage you just to go to knime.com right quick and look for the big yellow download button on the top right-hand side of the screen and go ahead and download the package in the background and install it while I'm talking. It doesn't take too long to get a hold of the software. So once you've installed KNIME, you might see something like this. So this is my KNIME Analytics Platform desktop. I'll take some time in a minute to kind of go around what each of these different features, each of the panes of the software represents. But I just kind of wanted to start out by showing you a workflow. What's a workflow? So a workflow is a collection of what we call nodes, and the nodes are these colored boxes that you see on my canvas here. Each node performs some individual task, and then once you combine all the workflows together, then you end up with a workflow which is, doing whatever it is you want to do: build a model, create an automated report, do some data blending, whatever that happens to be. In this particular case, we have a workflow, and you generally read them left to right. We have a workflow that's going to read in some data with the file reader node, and then it does a little bit of exploratory visualization with these blue nodes here, the descriptive statistics. Then this node splits the data into a training set and a test set and trains a decision tree model for classification. So then the model that is trained is used to predict on the test set, and then we have some additional visualizations and nodes here at the end to see how our model performs. I'm not so interested in walking through each individual one of the nodes and what it does with you. I just want to give you an overall flavor, if you haven't seen KNIME before, of what a workflow looks like and how it operates. So I've got all of these nodes connected together, and you'll notice that each node has a traffic light below it. This traffic light, you see them in different colors, yellow and red right now, indicate the status of the node. So red indicates a node hasn't been configured or executed yet. Yellow means it's ready to be executed, but it hasn't been configured. And what I can do is I can just run all of these nodes all at once by going up to my toolbar and clicking on the green arrow. And once I do that, you'll see these traffic lights change from yellow or red to green as the model is ingested, or I'm sorry, the data is ingested and the model is created. So you'll see that now. This is a pretty small data set, so it doesn't actually take very long for this model to be created and run. And now you'll see that I've run everything. I have little green traffic lights everywhere, which is an indication to me that everything ran pretty much successfully. So one of the nice things about KNIME is at each step along the way, I can always see how my data is being represented. After I read in my data, I could right-click on this file reader node and actually look at my data. Right after I've read it in, here's exactly what it looks like, along with the type of variable and the names of all the fields and so forth. And then after I make some changes, maybe I split my data into different data sets, I can look at the data that's been split at that particular point. So KNIME saves the state of your analysis at each one of these nodes along the way, which makes it really easy to do troubleshooting, for example, or to go back in and make a change in your workflow. You can then execute everything downstream from where you made the change and not worry about having to re-execute everything that was done upstream. So I wanted to just start here with a complete workflow to give you an idea of kind of what things would look like. But let me now, let's say we wanted to create a workflow from scratch, and I'll use a newly created workflow to kind of do a little bit of a tour around the interface for you and show you how some of these things work. So let's do that now. If I'm going to create a new workflow in KNIME, I can go to File, New, and then I'm going to choose New KNIME Workflow and click Next. And now I just need to give some sort of name. So we'll call this the Learnathon demo, if I can spell correctly. Never a given. Okay, click Finish. KNIME thinks for a second, and I now have this rather intimidating blank canvas in front of me. What am I going to do with this big blank canvas? So let's say that I have some data that I want to read in. I can read data from all sorts of different sources into KNIME, whether it's flat files like CSVs or Excel files, or I can read in from tables and databases. I can pull from big data sources. I can reach out and use GET requests to pull from web resources. All sorts of things I could do, but we'll start simple here. I've got a data set and it lives over here in the top left portion of my interface. This is the KNIME Explorer. The KNIME Explorer contains links to all the existing workflows that I've built, along with any data sets that I may have out there and connections to any KNIME servers that I may have access to. But you're just looking at a folder tree view, right? I've got a whole bunch of different workflows here. But you'll see in the example workflows folder, which you should also have if you have KNIME installed, because KNIME comes with these examples workflows. I have several of these examples here, and I even have some example data files. So I'm going to start with the CSV file called adult.csv. And to bring it into KNIME, I can just drag it from my KNIME Explorer onto the canvas directly. And what KNIME does is it says, oh, I know what to do with a CSV file. That needs a file reader node. So it creates a file reader node for me, and it's automatically populated it with a link to the data file on my local system. And it's also made some guesses about the format of the data, which I can see in the preview here. So it says, I'm guessing this is a CSV file. I need a column delimiter, or comma delimiter rather. And then here's what it thinks the different fields are, right? Integer, string, what the column names are, and so on. So if I see this and I think, yeah, that's pretty good, I think KNIME has guessed right, I can click OK. And now I can see that my traffic light, and let me make this a little bigger here because I know I have a big screen today. My traffic light has now changed to be yellow, meaning I've configured the node, but I haven't executed it. So if I want to execute this node individually, I can right click on it and go to execute, and you'll see KNIME thinks for a second and the traffic light is green. Now the data has been read in. So this data is going to be available at this black triangle, which is called an output port. And the black triangle, if I hover over it, I can see in my data set, I have 32,000 rows roughly and about 15 columns, which is well and good. So now what do I do? If I want to see what data is in here, again, I can right click, go down to the bottom of the context menu and choose the file table. And this is what I showed you before. Having read in the data now, here's everything that is available to me, all 32,000 rows and 15 columns and so forth. I also have some information on what we call the spec of the table. So all of the different columns it contains, along with possible values for strings or ranges of values, lower and upper bound for numeric fields and so on. So now that I've read my data in, let's say I want to do something with it. Maybe I'd like to do some sort of aggregation on it. So oftentimes, especially when you're starting out with KNIME, you know what it is that you want to do, in this case, some sort of aggregation, but you're not necessarily sure what the name of the node is that does the thing that you want it to do. So this is where you can use something called the workflow coach. This is in the middle left-hand side of the screen here. And you'll see that it has a whole bunch of different nodes listed in it along with a percentage. So what this is when I have the file reader highlighted, this is saying that 7% of the time, the next node that is often used downstream from the file reader is something called the joiner. These percentages are based on anonymized user statistics that we collect from our user community. So when you install KNIME for the first time, you're given the option to whether you want to opt into that or not. And if you do, then we collect information on the order in which you use nodes in KNIME. That's all that we use it for. We don't do anything nefarious with it. It's basically just to populate this workflow coach so that we can help other users, right? So I can look at this and say, okay, if I want to do some sort of aggregation here, do I want to do a join? No. Column filter. I scroll down a little bit. I think what I want is the group by to do an aggregation. So, okay, I can take this and drag it from the workflow coach directly into my workflow again. And now I need to connect these two nodes. So I can left click on my output port from my file reader, drag it over to the input port of my group by and release. And now these two nodes are connected. The data is going to be flowing from one to the other. So maybe I would like to go in now, and I guess I should have said, I didn't really talk about this before, but in this data set, this is US Census data for 30,000 individuals roughly, with things like their education, their marital status, their age, their gender, and so forth. So it's just kind of standard biographical census information. Maybe I'd like to do an aggregation here. And so to set that up, I can double click on the group by node. Whenever I double click on any node, it's going to open up what's called a configuration dialog for me. So if I double click and do that, I'll see, all right, here's my group by node. And in this case, maybe I would like to group by the work class, whatever that is. So I'm going to add the thing that I want to do an operation on to this green box on the right-hand side. And then to do a manual aggregation, I'll calculate the average age. So I'm going to get the average age for each group of work class. Don't worry too much about the configuration that I'm doing here. I don't want you to get hung up on the specific options for the group by node. I just want to get you an idea of how we might start to build a workflow and some of the things we can do with it generally. When we get into the exercise later, we'll get into the specifics of each one of these nodes. So now I click OK, and if I want to execute that, I can just right click and again, click the green arrow. KNIME thinks for a second. And then I can look at my result here, and there are all 9 of my different work classes. Well, I guess 8 plus some missings, and then the associated average age with each one. So that might be something that I might want to do. Now, maybe I would like to do something a little more interesting than just a tabular calculation. Instead, maybe I would like to generate some sort of visualization. So what I could do there, let's say I want to do a violin plot, which is kind of a fancier form of a box plot, something that's going to show me the distribution of a particular numerical field that I have available. So what I could do is, if I want to look for a violin plot, I could go to what's called the node repository. In the bottom left hand of my screen here, this is where all the different nodes for KNIME live. They're organized by their task. So there's this tree view here. I can look for, input and output nodes. If I want to find a reader, there's my file reader, right, that we just used already, if you want to read an Excel file. In this case, I want to find a view to do a visualization, so I could drill down and look for the views. In actuality, what I would do is I would go to the little search box here and I would type violin, to be able to find the violin plot. And I'm just going to take a detour for a second and show you something else, because again, this is one of those areas when you're starting out with KNIME, trying to identify and find the nodes that you want to use is oftentimes the trickiest part. It's not connecting the nodes together. You can do that. You can make the setup and adjustments. It's what node do I need to use? I haven't found it. I don't know what it is. And so to help you with that, we have something that's complementary to KNIME Analytics Platform called the KNIME Hub. You can go to that in your web browser, and in fact, I'll do that now by opening up my web browser and going to hub.knime.com. When you go to the hub, you get this big search bar like you see with Google or something, and you can type in all sorts of search terms so that you could search for individual nodes, or you could search for example workflows or components, which we'll talk about in a minute. In this case, if I was searching for a violin plot, I could type in violin and press enter. This will think for me for a second, and it's going to return for me all the different nodes and workflows and components it knows of that are associated with the violin plot. So here I can click to filter to just look at the nodes, and hey, that looks like a node, the violin plot. I can click on it. And what's nice about the KNIME Hub is it's going to take me here, and then I have this drag and drop option where I can actually drag this node directly from my web browser into KNIME Analytics Platform. So let me do that right quick. Make my web browser a little smaller. I can grab this little guy, drag it onto my canvas. KNIME thinks for a second, and there's my node. So I could have found this in the node repository if I have the extension installed. We do have some particular nodes that don't come by default with your KNIME Analytics Platform download, because otherwise the download would just be too big. So for things like image processing or text processing or some particular visualizations, we stash those in what we call extensions. And then to use them, you just have to do a one-time download. But the KNIME Hub will help you do that. If you try to drag in a node here for which the extension is not installed, you can see that this node is part of the KNIME Plotly extension. It will actually prompt you, and it will say, do you want to install this extension? You click yes or no. If you click yes, it'll install it. You restart your KNIME Analytics Platform, and then the node from that point forward will be available for you to use. So the Hub's a really useful tool for not only finding these individual nodes and bringing them into your workflows, but also if I wanted to see what's an example workflow look like that uses a particular node. Here's one from one of our data scientists, Paolo, the interactive violin plot. I can click on this, and then I get a little example workflow that's going to show me how to use this node. And I can click on the cloud icon here and download it into my local KNIME. It's going to come with some data, in this case, some data about wine. And then I can start playing with it and understanding how the violin plot works. So just a short detour from KNIME Analytics Platform to point out to you the KNIME Hub, because it's a really useful resource when you're starting out. But even if you've been using KNIME for a while, I use the Hub probably almost every day to go find workflows that I need to get more information on nodes. And in fact, the Hub is a place where if you create something really cool, an example workflow or a component that does something really interesting, you can upload it to the Hub for everybody else to benefit from. So it's not just a one way you go grab things from it. You can also upload things to the Hub as well. So I wanted to make you aware of that. So let's say, and actually I didn't want to put my violin plot up there, so I'm going to break that connection and create another one. Let's say that I wanted to do the same thing in this little demo workflow I'm building. Let's say I wanted to look at the average age by work class. So I can double click to configure this guy. For my data column, I'm going to pick age. For my group by column, I'm going to pick work class. I have some other options here about how I might display this, but for now, I'll just click OK. I can execute this node. And it gives me, you'll see this little triangle here. This little yellow triangle is a warning message saying that only the first 2,500 nodes or rows are displayed. So, if I wanted to bump this value up to encompass more than the 32,000 rows that are in my data set, I could do that and the warning message would go away. But for a violin plot, I don't care. This is fine. I'm going to go ahead, and after I've executed the node, I go about halfway down through the context menu, and I'm going to select this interactive view of the violin plot. So when I look at this guy, now I'm going to see what KNIME is doing is actually opening a Chromium window here to display this visualization. Now I can see by work class here's the average age. And so if you've, violin plot is basically a box plot, right? So we're looking at the median here, the first and third quartiles, and then you can see some outliers in the case of this private work class, for example. Now, this is all well and good. I've got a plot, but it's not very pretty, right? It's all kind of gray and dreary. Maybe I want to jazz this up a little bit because I want to put it in a report or something. So what I could do is use something called a color manager. If I search for it in the node repository, it comes right up. And in fact, I could drag this in between these two existing nodes, my file reader and my violin plot. If I drag it between them, this connector will turn red to indicate that I'm going to put something between. I can release, and it's going to give me a warning. It says, do you want to reset downstream nodes? Sure, that's fine. And now I've put in my color manager here, so I can kind of rearrange things. And maybe I'll do coloring by the work class. That probably makes the most sense. So in this color manager, I'm presented with some default palettes about what the colors might be. If I want to change these, it's easy for me to go in and make a selection about what individual colors should be. But if I just go by the palette, that is going to work fine in this case too. So now if I click OK and execute both of these nodes again and look at the visualization, I should have a much nicer plot, which in fact I do. So that's much nicer to look at, right? Again, I'm not showing you this stuff because I think the violin plot is so great or because this data set is interesting. It's not about that. It's about showing you how you connect the nodes together, where you get them from, things like using the hub and stuff like that. So a couple of other things that I want to make sure you're aware of here. Let me drag in a couple of other nodes that it'll become clear in a minute why I'm going to use these. I'm bringing in a table view and a row filter. So what I can do in KNIME, I can always take any group of nodes that I have and I can combine them into what's called a component. There are a number of reasons you might want to do this. You might want to do this just to tidy up your workflow, make things look a little cleaner. Or you can do what I'm going to do here, which is to combine a visualization together. So if I put together this table view and this violin plot in what's called a component, then I could have these in the same visualization that I could turn around and put into a report or something. So if I've selected all of these nodes by just drawing a box around them, I can right click, go about midway down and do create component. It's going to say, hey, what name do you want? I'm going to call this my viz. And you'll see that all of those nodes get collapsed down into this little gray box here, which is fine. Now I can execute all of those nodes all at once and open the views. So now that it's doing that, you'll see I put in, along with my violin plot, I put in this table view down below. So what I have now is the associated averages of the means by work class that I calculated before, along with the violin plot. And I can get really crazy and interesting with combining visualizations if I want. I could have, a line plot in with a parallel coordinates plot with a sunburst chart. I could put all sorts of stuff in together, to help flesh out some sort of exploratory analysis that I might need to do. And something else that I could do here, let's say if I'm looking at this violin plot and I think, I'd like to do some additional investigation into maybe the private work class and the local gov. Maybe there's something about that that interests me. I could go down to my table view here and click the checkboxes next to private and where's local gov? Right there. Go down here and click close and apply, and it's going to remember what I clicked. So the component will execute again right quick, and if I look at the results of what's coming out here, I'll see that I have this new Boolean column that is essentially a true false that has to do with what I selected and what I didn't. So if I selected the local gov and the private, those are marked as true. If I wanted to do some filtering on that, then I could just go downstream, use a row filter and say, hey, give me only the ones that I clicked on, basically. And now I've got a filter down version of that table that's based on an interactive selection that I just made. So you can see this is a super simple example for the demo, but I just wanted to give you an idea of some of the things that you could do potentially to facilitate interactivity in your workflows. One other thing about this too is you notice when I showed you the interactive view here, these were listed top and bottom. I can arrange this however I want. If I actually go inside the component here, I can click on in the toolbar this little stacked white boxes icon up here at the top, which brings out something called the layout editor. So I could take this layout editor and do a reset on it or a clear, and now I can rearrange these however I want. Maybe I'd want them to be side by side. So I could bring in a side by side divider, and then I could put my violin plot next to my table view, right? And maybe I want to add some white space, and then maybe down here I put some text later or something like that. I can arrange this however I want, whatever way makes the most sense. And now if I look at the view again, then I get something that is exactly what I just said. So now I actually have to widen it to make it look good since it's side by side, but you get the point, right? So I just wanted to show a little bit of how that works. Okay, a couple other things to highlight before I jump over to the slides. If you haven't used KNIME before, there's on this right-hand side here, there's the description pane. So this is context-sensitive help. Any node that I click on, it's going to give me a description of what the options are on the configuration dialog, as well as what the input and output ports are. There may be a link there to our e-learning course if it's a commonly used node. If it's some sort of model algorithm, we might have a link to the white paper that we use to that describes the algorithm better. You can always take a look at the description pane to get a better idea of what it is that individual nodes are doing. And then at the bottom right here, we also have the KNIME console, which I'm showing you. Has a bunch of warning messages in it currently, but this will have warning messages, error messages, any stuff that might go slightly off kilter while you're running your workflow will show up here, so you can go back and revisit and do some QA if you need to. Okay, I'm going to stop with the intro demo for now. If you have questions, feel free to throw them out in the chat. I don't see any at the moment, but I've got the chat open. I'm keeping an eye on it. Let me hop over to the slides for a second, and let's talk about what we want to learn about today in the course of the Learnathon. So now that we've seen KNIME, talk a little bit, just a little bit of theory, maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll jump straight over to the hands-on session. Okay. So do you recognize this chart? This is the CRISP-DM diagram. CRISP-DM stands for the Cross-Industry Standard Process for Data Mining. So this is kind of one way to think about the data science modeling lifecycle process. There are others out there. SEMA is another one that you may have heard of that's pretty common too. But they all kind of point at the same thing, which are, you see in these blue boxes, these different steps that make up the process for data mining. So this particular bit starts up here in the business understanding. What is the business understanding? This is your boss comes to you and says, hey, we need a forecast for how many widgets we're going to need in our 3 manufacturing facilities in October, right? He has a business understanding of what he needs to solve some business problem. So that's where something generally starts. And then moving from the business understanding, then you're going to go to the data understanding. So now that I have that question in mind, how many widgets at X, Y, and Z to do something in some amount of time, you can start to translate that to a data understanding. What data sets am I going to need to be able to scrounge together and combine and blend and clean up to be able to answer that business question? So once you have a handle on that, the data sources that you may need to have, then you can actually start doing the preparation on the data. And this is probably the most cumbersome part of the data science process, is cleaning, right? You guys all know when any data sets you get, it's never in the format that you need. It's always messy. There's always missing data in there. There's stuff that's wrong. There's things that have been blended maybe upstream from you inappropriately that you need to desegregate again. So there's tons and tons usually of data cleanup and preparation that you need to do, ultimately with an eye on doing some sort of predictive modeling. So once you've completed that step of cleaning your data, whatever steps that may involve, then you're going to get to the modeling step where you're going to, depends on what you're doing, right? You might be doing classification, you might be doing clustering, you might be doing some sort of forecasting on a time series basis. So depending on what task is at hand, that's going to dictate what type of model that you use. Once you have actually built some sort of model, then you're going to try and evaluate it. How well did that model do, right? It's easy to build a model that predicts garbage, but that's also not very useful, right? So we like to be able to put together a model that actually tells us something. And so there's an evaluation phase to be able to figure that out. Now, when you get to this evaluation phase, it may turn out that you've done a great job. And right off the bat, you can move on to the next stage, which is deployment. Or you may have to go way back to the beginning. You may have to go back to your data preparation to clean some things up again. You may have to go back and look at your data sets to make sure that you have the right things you need. You may need to make sure that you're asking the right business question in the first place. So this can be a repetitive, iterative process as you go through making models, trying to understand what your limitations are from an algorithmic perspective, from a data perspective, and tightening it up and getting to a point where you actually have something useful. Once you do get to that point, then you can move to the deployment phase, which is, now that I have a model that predicts something, how can I put it out there so that other people can make use of it? How can we then actually get some insights into our data, right? So deployment's actually really important, although a lot of data scientists, it's maybe not the most interesting part for them, but it is really important from a business perspective, right? You've got to make something as a data scientist that's useful to other people. So if you take that crisp DM diagram and you unroll it, right? We have the circle, so we're going to kind of unroll it and flatten it out. Then you have something like this. Here's the data access, data prep, model training, model optimization, evaluation, and deployment. And if you look at this now, you might think that kind of starts to look like a KNIME workflow, which it kind of does, right? That's a little bit of the idea here. So we're flowing from left to right with our data, and then you have some of these steps that may need to be iterated on or revisited depending on how things go. So starting with the data access, we have some data sets you're going to use, and then in the data prep stage, maybe you need to blend data from multiple sources. Certainly, you're going to have to figure out how to deal with missing values and imputation in your data set. You might need to generate features that don't exist to begin with. Might be something you have to tackle. Maybe you have too many features. Maybe you have thousands and thousands of features and you need to boil something down to a manageable size. That's dimensionality reduction. Removal of outliers, normalization, all that sort of stuff falls under this umbrella of data preparation. Then for the model training stage, again, this depends on what kind of task you're performing as to whether you would use, ensemble models for classification or, bagging and boosting maybe, or maybe instead you're doing some sort of hierarchical clustering or, k-means or something like that. You're going to be building a model or a suite of models. And if you have several of them, you may need to compare them to each other to see how that they're performing. So you can have like a champion and a challenger and pick the one that's the best. So there's a lot of things going on in the model training stage. Ultimately, you're going to want to do some model optimization as well. So once you've selected a good model, chances are you can still squeeze some additional predictive power out of it by tuning what's called its hyperparameters. These are going to vary depending on what kind of algorithm that you're using, but oftentimes you're not going to know what the optimal parameters are going in. So there's a little bit of trial and error and trying to figure out what those are. KNIME has some nodes that can help you do that. And if you're in Satori's group today and group 2, you'll see some of those. Ultimately, we're going to try and see how well our model did. We'll want to use different performance measures depending on our task at hand. So it might be something simple like, accuracy, sensitivity, specificity. If it's, binary classification, looking at the area under a ROC curve. But we also may want to look at things like the stability of our model, using cross-validation. There's all sorts of things we can check to make sure that we have a model that predicts well and generalizes as it isn't overfitting and is actually going to be useful down the line. And then again, once we have that model, then we need some strategy on how to deploy it. It might be, putting it up on a server somewhere so that it can be accessed with a REST API. You can, throw new data at the model and get new predictions from it. You might build out some sort of dashboard like I just showed you. Maybe you just need to generate an automated report or write files out somewhere. That's a simpler context for deployment, but still valid. So these are all things you might need to do at the end of the process. Now, when we're actually building the models, again, as we're following this flow from left to right, again, you're starting out with some data set with past observations. Generally, we're going to want to split the data in a few different ways. So we're going to want to split our data into what's called a training set. This will usually be the largest set that we use, maybe 80%, 70% of our data. That training set's going to be what we use to build the model. And then for the model optimization, we're going to have a much smaller set called the validation set. This is where we're going to try and figure out what the best hyperparameters are, for that particular type of model that we're using. So in a random forest context, this might be something like, tree depth or the number of models in our random forest, something like that. And then ultimately, we're going to have a small test set as well, completely unseen data as far as the model is concerned to see how well the model performs. So, a sample of the split here might be 80-10-10, right? 80% for your training, 10% for your validation, and 10% for the test set. And then ultimately, the idea, right, is we have a new model that is going to predict using completely unseen data for real-world applications. We don't want it to be overfitting. We want it to give nice, good, generalized predictions that we can hang our hat on. Now, a step that we didn't really talk about, but that is often important, is the data exploration step. So sometimes this is in between maybe data access and data preparation. We want to do some exploration of our data, and probably when we do that, we want to use some sort of visualization tool, right? So it's one thing to just stare at a table of your data, but that's probably not going to get you very far. You probably need, a line plot if you're looking at some time series data, or maybe you're concerned about distributions of your data, so you want to look at a box plot or a violin plot to see what your outliers are, how skewed things are, things like that. So all sorts of different visualizations available in KNIME Analytics Platform, and you can see some of them here in the node repository. Things I just mentioned, like a line plot, box plot, but also things, a lift chart, see how much predictability you're getting out of your model, a rot curve to see how well a model is performing, bubble charts and 3D scatter plots, all sorts of cool stuff available. And you can combine these together in components to build dashboards. Now, sometimes people ask, well, what about big data, right? Like you may have, 100,000 observations in your data set, but I have 2 billion. So I can't do this on my local laptop, right? How am I going to use KNIME to do something or to build a model that can deal with that type of large data set? So we actually have nodes in KNIME that we won't talk about today, but I just want you to be aware that they're there to serve the whole big data process, because ultimately the analytics process itself, like the crisp DM diagram I showed you, none of that really changes just because you happen to have a whole lot of data. The process in general is still the same, but you may need some additional tools to be able to deal with big data. You may need tools to be able to connect to Hadoop or Hive cluster where that data lives. You may need tools to be able to build models in Spark instead of building local models. Fortunately, we have nodes in KNIME that can help you do all of that stuff, that can help you ingest, process data, and build the models remotely on a big data cluster, and still have the KNIME GUI interface to help you do it. Again, this is not something we really talk about today, but it's a really cool feature of our software. So if this is something that's useful to you, you can let us know after today, and we have some additional resources about big data that may be helpful for you. One of the things we try to do with KNIME, because we're an open source company, it's an open platform, we want to make available to you a lot of different use cases so that when you open up KNIME to try to do something, you're not just staring at a blank canvas and being frustrated, right? We want to give you a bunch of examples for real use cases so that you can actually start understanding what's going on with KNIME and taking those examples and making them your own. So whether you're trying to do things like credit scoring or looking at fraudulent claims, anomaly detection, time series analysis, forecasting stuff, we have all sorts of these different examples on our example server. You can see that they're organized by use case and functionality. But really, and I showed you this already, I wouldn't necessarily use the example server if I'm doing this myself. I would use the KNIME Hub. If I want to get an idea of how does churn prediction look in KNIME, how does deconstructing a signal from an instrument look in KNIME, I can go out to the hub, I could search for those keywords, find example workflows, download these example workflows, which are going to come with data almost always, and then execute it on my machine, start playing around, and really understand how those work. And once I have that understanding, then it's just a matter of swapping out data sets, swapping out nodes, and then I can start going and applying things to my actual task that I've been asked to do. So the hub is super useful for that. Again, it's not just about pulling information from the hub. If you have something really cool you've come up with, you can also upload to the hub as well, so that the entire community can benefit from what you've learned, what you've done. So check out the hub.knime.com for that. Okay, so enough in the short term here about the data science cycle. Let me talk a little bit more specifically about our data set and what it is that we're going to do together today. So we have this classification problem that uses the airline data set. This originally comes from statcomputing.org back in 2009. They had a contest to do predictions with this data set, and we're using really just a subset of it from January 2007. What we're going to try to do is predict departure delays based on this airline data set. So the airline data set itself contains things like when an airline or when a flight took off, what airline it was associated with, what airport it was at, how much time it spent taxiing on the runway, things like that. We're also going to combine that airline information with meteorological information, right? Because it's probably useful to know if we had, heavy rain or thunderstorms or snow or other things that might inhibit travel times. So taking those two data sets together and combining them, we're going to try and predict the departure delays. We're going to look just at the airport ORD, which is Chicago O'Hare. And what we're going to say is if a particular departure delay is greater than 15 minutes, we'll call that a delay. If it's less than 15 minutes, then we'll say it's not a delay. Might not be on time, but it's not a delay. So ultimately what we're doing then is we're boiling it down to a binary classification problem using these existing features that I described before. And so to get at this problem, we're breaking it into chunks for our different groups. So the first group, group one, which is the one that I'll be working with, is about data access and preparation. So reading the data in, blending it together, cleaning it up, getting rid of missing values, finding where our outliers are, doing the partitioning and splitting it so that at the end of the exercise, we have an appropriate training data set and test data set that we can use for building our model. Group two is all about building the models themselves. So Satori will be leading that group. That's going to all be centered around using different algorithmic approaches to get a handle on the classification, doing some parameter optimization to see how we can squeeze additional predictive ability out of those models, and then using some specialized visualizations, things like ROC curves, looking at confusion matrices to see how well the models perform, and ultimately deciding, okay, this is the one that I want to use because it gives me the best results. So that's group two, all about modeling. Group three, Corey's group, is the deployment group. So once we have a model that we've built that we feel like is giving us good results, what can we do with it? We could put it on a KNIME server and basically throw REST calls at it and get predictions back from it. We could do that. There are different automated reporting strategies that we could take about looking at the results of the model. We could write out tabular results to a database. There's all sorts of different things that fall under the umbrella of the deployment that Corey is going to be touching on in his group. So to start this, you're going to import this file, learnathon_2020.knar, into your workspace. And we just have in the chat here a link to the tiny URL. You probably see that. This tinyurl.com/KNIME2020VL. This is going to be the workflow archive. This is where you're going to get the workflow archive that we'll use for the exercises. And it's probably worth me showing you right quick how you would do that. So if you go to, let me pull up my web browser here. So here it is, tinyurl.com/KNIME2020VL. If you hit enter on that, it's going to take you to a private Dropbox. And in that Dropbox, you'll see a few things. So you'll see the slides that we've used today, the ones that I'm just talking through now, and the ones that we'll use in the individual groups. You'll also see the archive. So we give you the Learnathon 2020.knar. This is the one you want to download and save. We also give you the solutions too, but please don't look at those yet. Look at those later if you're getting frustrated, but we want to make sure that you have them if you need them. Once you download this to your machine, let me see if I can show you what this looks like here. Sorry, I have to move some Zoom windows out of the way so that you can see what I'm doing. So I have a whole bunch of stuff on the right-hand side of my screen, but you can probably see this Learnathon 2020.knar with the KNIME triangle logo on it. If you double-click this guy, after you've downloaded it, it's going to say, oh, I have a whole bunch of different stuff to import into KNIME. Here's group 1, group 2, group 3, all the different associated workflows, and the data that comes with it. So what you can do is just click on Finish. I'm not going to do it because I already have the stuff installed, but just click on Finish. It's going to load it into your KNIME Analytics Platform. And then you can go over here to your KNIME Explorer and look in your local workspace and find the Learnathon 2020 folder. And then go down to the challenges, and this is where you'll find the starting workflows that we're going to use in our separate groups. So I just wanted to show you briefly how it is that you do that. Okay. Any other slide stuff I wanted to show you here? So these are, again, group 1, group 2, and group 3. We'll go into this more detail in the individual groups. I won't belabor this point here, but there are a couple of things I wanted to show you. So next week, in fact, is KNIME's Fall Summit. This will be all week long. Normally, in pre-COVID times, we would meet at a convention center and all get together and network. The first 2 days are training courses. So there's several different training courses you can choose from. We'll talk about those in the breakout sessions if you're interested. And then Wednesday and Thursday are the summit sessions where we have our development team and come and tell you about the cool new stuff we're working on in the software. We have other power users who will be, talking about how they use KNIME in their jobs, in the enterprise, what they're doing. So you get real use cases, real life sort of applications of KNIME on Wednesday and Thursday. And then we have some bonus workshops on Friday as well. And then of course we have all the typical social media places you can connect with us. I mentioned already the hub. There's also the forum, which is a good resource. If you have questions about building workflows, come join us on the forum. We have a weekly blog and then the regular social media. Okay, I have talked quite enough. It is time for us to now split into our groups. So if you signed up already and made a choice for group 1, group 2, or group 3, we're going to click the button here in a second, and it's going to prompt you to join a breakout room. And you should be assigned to the breakout room that you chose. So if for some reason that you are not, like if you get assigned to the wrong room and you get in there and you realize, I'm not supposed to be with Scott, I should be over here with Corey, then you can just back out to the main room and type in the chat where it is that you want to go, and we have someone that will assign you to the proper room. So we should expect to take 45 minutes to an hour in these rooms together. I don't see any questions about this at the moment, so I think we're probably ready to go. Lindsay, if you want to click the button, and then we'll just leave from the breakout room, so we won't come back together for a wrap up. Once you're done with the exercise, then you're free to go. So we'll see everybody shortly in the breakout rooms.